Thank you for tuning in to Illegal Radio. My name is Dustin McCrickard. With me is the one and only, as always, Michael Clarke. We are going to be talking about a subject that I'm not going to lie, brethren, it's controversial. A lot of brethren just try to ignore it. They don't want to discuss it, but brethren, we have to discuss these things because it's affecting the church. And we need to make sure that everything we say and do is according to God's will and not just what is popular. And I'm talking about prom, dancing, those subjects that we see that teens face every single day. And as the teens are listening now, something that you guys probably not fully understand is the issue with prom. So, Michael, explain to our listeners right now maybe some statistics about prom or a little bit about prom.
And prom is one of those things that every year around this time especially, the preparations begin. The girls in high school start to talk about what dress they're going to buy. And in fact, just today on Facebook, I saw a former student that I went to school with posting former dresses that she wore, trying to sell them. And she said, and it struck me as hilarious, only been worn once. I've only worn this once. And, you know, it's only been worn once. And she talked about how much money the dress was. I can remember in school hearing some of these girls saying, I bought a $400 dress, a $500 dress. And why are you buying a dress that's that much money for an event that, number one, is only going to be done once in your life, if it's not a wedding, first and foremost. But I think about dancing in general, and I remember Don Blackwell's book, The Truth About Moral Issues, and he even did videos on these subjects as well, and he talked about dancing. And at the time this book was published, he said ABC's Dancing with the Stars was boasting 22.5 million viewers on Monday nights. And I'll be honest with you, it's something that is even catching women in the Lord's church, because they think, well, because I'm not going to lust after the females, I can watch this show and not be affected by it. When we start making simple compromises like that, we are very, very dangerously placing ourselves in a situation that we should not be involved with. And when it comes to prom, I went to high school in public school for most of my life. I was homeschooled my senior year in high school, and it always amazed people when they'd ask me, are you going to prom, that I said no. And I can remember there was a girl that liked me in high school, and I liked her too, and she even said, Michael, I'll go with you to prom if you'll just go to prom. I'll be your date. You just have to go to prom. And I said no. And, even if that meant we weren't going to be together, no, it's not worth it. And prom itself is a dangerous night for more than just the dancing, more than just what happens at the prom. A lot of teenagers are doing things after the prom that are really, really difficult. When I think about prom itself, you mentioned it's a difficult subject. It's extremely difficult. If you were to go to a prom, though, and be a chaperone, and you were to stand in the middle of the dance floor and say, okay, we want to have our first dance be only males, and we only want males to dance with other males, slow dance. Nobody would get forward, and nobody would come forward to dance. And that to me shows one thing. It is always taken in a sexual nature, even when you say it's not. And you can lie to yourself, and I can try to lie to myself and say that I won't be thinking those thoughts. But if you and I, Dustin, would not slow dance together, then that says a lot right there.
Amen.
It proves to me that there's a sexual act involved with dancing. And as we begin this topic tonight, I'm reminded of Romans 6:1, which talks about continuing in sin that grace may abound. And he says, of course not, we're not going to do that. And it really gives this idea that should we sin more so we can have more grace? Well, absolutely not. And some parents are saying, well, I'm just going to let my last child go to prom, and then that'll be it. I'll never do it again. Well, guess what's going to happen when their children's children pull out the yearbook and see the pictures and start to ask questions? Then the grandparents are going to have to answer, number one, why they allowed their sons and daughters to go. And then the sons and daughters that are now parents are going to have to answer to their own children of why they're not allowed to go. So if you think it's wrong enough that you're going to put a stop to it at some point, you should probably just not ever do it. Exactly. I mean, with your experience as a gospel preacher, I'm sure you've run into some situations as well. What types of things have you dealt with prom?
Well, always in the controversial issues that go along with it, you got to think, what, as you said, what is going on at prom. And as I stressed with parents, that even those who are for prom, I go, you got to think that not only the whole principle of prom itself, But even over the years, what you might have in your mindset of what prom is completely different of what it is nowadays. And we've seen the evolution of dance and how it's made its way to definitely a very sexual behavior, even downright almost to the point. And that's what I think I try to convey to especially parents with these children. I say you're going to put them in an environment where they're going to be interacting with each other, but you say for the sake of tradition, we're going to let this happen. And then I would go on the whole train of thought of if you're going to let them do that, then you might as well open that door. That's like a Pandora's box. You're going to open it up.
Right.
And anything is fair game then. And especially if I've seen, oh, Michael, I've seen good, faithful brethren. I've seen godly people stumble with this subject because, once again, tradition. And as you said it, they're going to be going through and they will always say, well, like you said, we're going to this will be it. That'll be it. No more. But it doesn't stop. It's like Judges. It goes around and around and around and around. They're going to do evil in the sight of the Lord. Why? Because that's what their forefathers did. That's what their parents did. They look to the examples, and then you never want that question. Well, you used to do that. Why is it wrong for me to do such? And especially with a teenager, and as a teenage mind, that's what they will look at. They say, well, if it was good enough for my parents, it's good enough for me.
Mm. And it's interesting to me, too. I mentioned Don's lesson on the truth about dancing and giving credit where credit is due. This next piece of information also comes from that same video. You know, the word dance, including dance, dances, and dancing, is used in the Bible, and it's found 27 times. However, when one reads those 27 occurrences, they'll find that these words are used in two different ways. The rest is to jump up and down with joy as an enthusiastic fan does when his team scores, a celebratory action. In 1 Samuel 6:14 through 16, when the Ark of the Covenant was finally returned to Jerusalem, David danced. In Exodus 15, Miriam led the women in dance and song and praise God. Now, the second sense in which dance is used is the sense of men and women interacting as they would at a party, dance club, or, as we're discussing, prom. Exodus 32, Moses on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments, the children of Israel had made a golden calf, and they're dancing around and engaged in immoral conduct. Moses was so offended by this and strongly condemned them for it. Every time men and women danced together in the Old and New Testament, the act was condemned. And if I'm going to be a faithful gospel preacher, Christian, member of the Lord's church, I need to speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where it's silent. And when the Bible says that every instance of dancing together is condemned, it's best for me not to do it. Now, there are questions asked, and Don even has some of them at the end of this lesson, about whether or not a married man and woman could dance together. Now, obviously, if you're in the privacy of your own home, you do whatever you want to do, and as long as it's acceptable and pleasing before God. Marriage was created for man and woman to enjoy certain aspects that they can't enjoy with anyone else. And so I wouldn't condemn it for a married woman and man, but I remember being asked if I would ever dance at my wedding, and I said no. And I was even asked, well, what if it was just you and I? And I said, look, if one person's going to start dancing at a wedding, two things occur. One, other people are going to get an impression that we think dancing in general is just okay when we don't. And two, other people that are maybe not Christians that are attending the wedding are either going to start dancing themselves or they're going to ask why they're being told they can't dance and we can. And I just think that it's not a good idea. And even, you know, I think the basic problem with all this, though, is a lack of knowledge. We have been so scared as Christians at times to talk about these subjects because of the backlash that comes with them. And in Hosea 4:6, it talks about the people were being destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. Now, not because they didn't have the knowledge in general, but because the knowledge that was given was rejected. And there were times in the world where I'm sure sermons have been preached or topics have been discussed about prom, just like you and I are doing, and the person that spoke from the Bible was criticized for it and told that's not what you're supposed to do, and I don't like how you made it this way, or you spoke too strongly about dancing. If I'm saying what the Lord said, you're not supposed to be mad at the messenger. You need to be mad at the man who wrote the message or the God who wrote the message. And really, if God were to come down and say these things, there wouldn't be any quibbling about it. There wouldn't be any type of qualm at what's being said because, number one, it'd be said in such a respected way as far as he'd either say it in a booming voice where we all understood, or nobody would want to say anything about it.
Exactly. And you got to also remember what is I wouldn't say the message itself, but what is the meaning of the message? It's out of love. We're pleading to our brethren about this. I used to say this a lot, and I've heard it from a gospel preacher, and I loved it. I had a sister in Christ. One time I gave a sermon. It was on church discipline. And, that's something that is needed within the church also. But afterwards, she came up to me and she said, Dustin, you were stepping all over my toes. And I said, sister, I was aiming for your heart.
Yeah.
And it clicked with her right then and there that, the reason why we go up here and we say these and we preach the full oracles of God is because this is what God wants us to do. And like you said, people don't have the knowledge of that anymore. They used to call us, I think it was Brad Harrop that once said, they used to call us Bible teaching and Bible preaching people, or Bible toting, Bible quoting. We don't do that anymore.
Right.
And if we're truly Christians, if we're truly honoring God's will, we will follow it to the fullest degree, every jot and tittle.
Yeah. And when it comes to dancing, too, I mentioned a moment ago that it's not just dancing at the prom that causes a problem. Prom in general is a night that a lot of people lose their Christianity, so to speak. They throw it away for a night. And I've heard jokes before from some people that said, I'm not going to be a Christian for a few moments after I speak with you. I need to say something, and it's not going to be Christ-like. And if that's a joke, number one, I don't agree with that. But number two, there are literally people that believe that for prom, they cannot be a Christian for one night. And what happens at prom is usually there's drinking. And then, as most of us would know, after prom is over, you and your date go back to a hotel. And what occurs is what's exactly been building the entire night while you've been dancing together. And it's like I mentioned at the very beginning of this, if you will say that you cannot dance man to man without that being considered gross or disgusting, or hey, that's homosexual, we don't want to do that, then you can't tell me that you could do that with a woman who men will be way more attracted to and not have those types of thoughts or feelings. I'm not attracted to men, and yet I wouldn't for 1 second, like I mentioned, dance with another man. Even if it were a joke, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. But when it comes to dancing with another woman, that's even, and some of the dances today, you mentioned, and I don't think you mentioned it with this intention, but the video evolution of dance that came out a few years ago and that has been played on, and even some of the late night hosts have taken it and done it as well, you can really see how it has gone from regular dance moves that are hilarious to us now to downright sexual movement. And it is, even people that have become famous for it, like Miley Cyrus with what she did at the awards show a few years ago and things like that, it's downright sinful and disgusting to see other people doing that. And not only that, when you see it on the television, children are going to be watching and asking questions. How many people watched the Super Bowl last night or Sunday night and were offended when Peyton Manning said, I'm going to drink a lot of Budweiser after this game? It really hurt a lot of people who said he's a role model and people are looking up to him and hearing what he's saying. And yet, because he has said that, they've lost respect for him. What's the same difference with dancing? There is no difference. And yet some of the same people that would be offended at the Budweiser comment are sweeping it under the rug with dancing and prom and such like.
I say that brings up another good point. Jeremiah 6:15. I love this quote. Look what Jeremiah says. He says, were they ashamed when they had committed an abomination? No, they were not ashamed at all, nor did they know how to blush. That's the phrase right there. They've forgotten how to blush. We, as a nation, have forgotten how to blush. We look at this, we look at sin, we look at this dancing saying, oh, there's nothing to it. Why? And I can't tell you how many times my young boys will say, well, what she's wearing, it doesn't affect me. I don't think of that anymore. And my favorite phrase, I became desensitized to the things that are on there. Why? Because of what they watch on TV, what they see in movies nowadays, and even in sports. We look at that. We look at, everything down to the cheerleaders. You can't tell me that's modest. We have forgotten how to blush. And whenever that mindset creeps into the brotherhood and with brethren, it's our downfall, because then we say, well, it's only one night, it'll be okay. But what happens when people start dancing? Well, you have those thoughts that enter into your mind, that lust that happens afterwards, and there's so many scriptures that's against that. That's not what a Christian needs to be like.
Right. And I'm reminded again of Hosea 4. You know, the problem Israel had at this time was partying. And in fact, they did things that they considered to be pleasing to God, or they said they were. That didn't make them pleasing to God, but the partying that they were doing, they lived life as if there was no tomorrow, nothing to be ashamed of, treated idol gods as a source of partying. They gave themselves in worship in sexual acts to glorify God. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I fear is going on today, where we are putting ourselves in sexual situations and yet on the outside professing to be Christ-like and Christians. And what is so interesting about this is God says, because you've rejected knowledge, I'm going to reject you. And if God's going to say that to his chosen people, the Israelites, and say that to the very same people that he had said, I'm going to bless you, if he's willing to hurt them as well, what makes you and I any different as Christians? We're chosen people by God to be different, setting an example in Christ-like. And I don't ever see Christ saying that dancing is an appropriate thing for me to be doing. And in fact, I find the idea of Deuteronomy 28, where if you listen to the Lord and you follow after what he says, he's going to bless you. You don't listen to me, I'm going to curse you. And I'm going to make your life difficult. It's going to be really, really hard to live. And when it comes to dancing itself, I'm reminded of Galatians 5 and verse 19, where it says the works of the flesh, and you've got to zero in on that word flesh, because it is works of the flesh. They're manifest. These would be adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness. Now, lasciviousness, I love the way that some people have defined this term as the unchaste handling of males and females. And that is legitimately what prom is all about. You are doing things with someone who is not your wife. And it blows my mind. You see these posts and these pictures all the time. I'm a daddy. I've got a shotgun and a daughter. Which would you like to be involved with? It's things of that nature. And it says this, my daughter is not to be messed with. Yet sadly, these same fathers send their daughters out to prom with no thought of what's going on. If I were to go into someone's random house and just start to try to do the same type of dance movements that would be done at the prom, I would literally be shot in some situations and be restrained and things of that nature, because it is not appropriate. Yet you call it prom or you call it a dance, and all of a sudden anything goes. And that's not appropriate. That's not right. And things that, there's this huge controversy now with the Duggar family and what he had done. I do think there can be connections with dancing, watching dancing and all that, and leading it into pornography, leading it into adultery and things of that nature as well. Because you start to watch, as you mentioned a moment ago, cheerleaders on Sunday or at a football game in general. You can't tell me that it's not noticed by some men. In fact, at the Memphis Grizzly games, sometimes if you attend them, people will cheer louder when the cheerleaders come onto the court than they do when the team is playing. And I'm a big Steelers fan, of course, and one of the things I love about the Steelers, they don't have cheerleaders. And they were asked a few years ago, why don't you have any cheerleaders? And they said, why do we need them? They're not vital to a football game. They're not needed for a football game. Our fans are already here to cheer us on and get us, pumped up to play the game. So what would we need cheerleaders for? And really, I like that, because not only do I not have to worry when I watch a game of watching the Steelers cheerleaders come on the screen or anything like that, he really hit the nail on the head. Why do we need cheerleaders? You really don't. The fans' purpose is to pump the team up and cheer them on and to root for them and get them fired up to play. Yet most teams will say that they need cheerleaders. They're really just eye candy. And in fact, the Dallas Cowboys have proven that over the years, releasing calendar after calendar, television show after television show, and they've even got reality shows of how to become a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader. And it's like set up like an American Idol type show, where it's a reality show. These girls come out to try out to be a cheerleader, and then it shows that's ridiculous. It's not even needed. And yet they make a ton of money off their cheerleaders, and it's because sex sells. It really does. And Galatians 5:19 says, these are the works of the flesh. And if you're going to have lasciviousness, the absence of restraint, indecent bodily movements, you're going to be working for the flesh, and you'll be of your father the devil, who will love nothing more than to watch this. You think the devil loves this time of year? I bet he does, because prom is something that just probably makes him giggle with delight. I am getting to watch good Christians compromise on their morals and compromise on biblical things by sending their daughters to prom.
Exactly, and going off of what Don Blackwell has wrote in that book of The Truth About Moral Issues about dancing, one of the things that is so true is the environment that you're in. That environment is what? It's not well lit. It's low lit, if anything. It's the whole aspect that, you can get away. It's in the darkness. No one could see you in that aspect. And then you also look at these dresses that are not modest whatsoever. It's amazing how I get in these conversations, especially with my teen girls, even about the dress itself. I said, that's not modest. They go, but Dustin, it goes all the way down to my ankles. I go, but it doesn't matter if you're missing the whole upper part of the dress.
That's right.
And I said, we don't, for some reason, they don't think of it like that. These dresses are made to highlight certain features.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I don't believe that our brethren have caught on to, or they should be paying attention to. That what are you doing? You're putting your own daughter or your loved one that you care about out there wearing that. That's going to say, look at me, but most importantly, look at these certain features that I have. And I think on the good stewardship part of it, those dresses aren't cheap. I mean, you look at $400 to $500 on a dress that could be put to so many other uses.
Oh, and when you mentioned that they think that it's okay as long as it goes to their ankle, I think one of the problems why they think that is so many preachers, and rightfully so, have stated Genesis 3, God made them tunics that covered from the shoulder beyond the knee. And we've said that that's what it takes to be modest. That's what it takes to be modest. And years ago, that was right. But now, with yoga pants and tight-fitting shirts, you can be fully covered head to toe and still be downright immodest. And that's what is so hard for these young ladies to understand, and even some of these men to understand is, but I'm fully covered. Well, when it's like painted skin, it doesn't matter if you're fully covered, you're still immodest. And you've got certain individuals that will go out in public and say that they're dressed when they're not, but they wouldn't answer the door in their undergarments. But they would go to into the beach in a bikini, and they would do. And these are all types of things. When we talk about prom, I know this kind of sounds not on the same subject, but it is, because prom is dealt with the same innocent nature of it's just prom. It's just a dance. Nothing's going to happen. Well, Don said in his lesson, that's simply not true. Something's going to happen. And if you say that, and it may not happen 9 times out of 10, but that 10th time could still lead to sin. And I've heard preachers say before, just like Asa, you can live for years and be a good person and fall away in your last few years of life and still die lost. Why would we want to mess with these types of things? And it reminds me of a story as I'm starting to think about kind of some closing thoughts of this. It reminds me of a story of a young girl who came into her dad and said, Dad, I really, really, really want to go to prom. But I'm not going to dance. I just want to stand and be with my friends. And the father says, okay, that's fine. And he bought her a beautiful white dress. It was modest and everything. She's a deacon's daughter. Beautiful white dress. And he takes her and he's driving out, and there's this coal mine that he stops at. And he says, I want you to go in and just walk around. Don't touch the walls. Don't touch anything. Just walk around in the midst of it for a little bit. And she said, Dad, you're crazy. If I go in there, there's going to be dust that's going to get on this beautiful white dress, and I'm going to be affected. And she started to realize what he was saying. It doesn't matter if my intention to go to prom is just to go and hang out with my friends. I'm putting myself in a situation that's sinful. And just like when I go to the zoo, I'm very thankful for the glass, keeping me separated from the lion and the snakes and things of that nature. I need to put up a glass, so to speak, and not put myself in the same situations where I could even be close to doing something wrong. There's no way I'm getting through that glass to that lion. It is there for my protection. The Bible says protection for you is to not be involved with these types of things like we talked about in Galatians a moment ago. When we think about prom and dancing in of itself, there are times where Don mentioned, doing something as funny or kooky as the chicken dance or the hokey pokey and things like that. Those are just literally, there's nothing even sexual involved in moving around in that. It's to the point when you get down to even some of the lyrics that Don will post. And I would encourage anyone listening to get a copy of Don's lesson, whether it's on book form or audio form or video form. Listen to these lessons, because Don, I've always said, has done a great job talking about these difficult subjects in a very plain way and to the point. But he even mentioned some of these songs and some of the songs that are being played at prom. He mentioned some of the top 10 songs are Just Dance by Lady Gaga, which has some of the most filthy lyrics in it, as most of her songs would have. Number 3 on the list was I Kissed a Girl, Katy Perry's song from the perspective of a lesbian interaction that she had. And then number 7 was Sexy Back by Justin Timberlake. Now, just some of these titles. Just Dance doesn't have necessarily as much of a sexy title in and of itself, but I Kissed a Girl, knowing a female singing that spells trouble already. Then you think of Sexy Back, and of course that's going to bring your mind. I mean, the word sex is being used in the song, and this is being played at a prom. We are so illogical. It's, to me, the same logic that's used at a football game. For 3 quarters, you can get drunk out of your mind. But the 4th quarter, they stop selling beer because 1 quarter is enough for you to not be to sober up, And you know what you see, though, and I'm sure if you've ever been to a football game, you see this. People at the very end of the 3rd quarter go and buy as much beer as they can carry and bring it back for the 4th quarter. Nobody's sobering up. And if we're going to make that logic, the same logic we use at prom, and say we'll play songs that have dirty lyrics and dirty intentions, but we're not going to expect them to do anything dirty, and then get offended, as some Memphis schools here recently have closed down some of their dances because they've gotten too out of hand, we're fooling ourselves into thinking that we're able to do these things. And it's like playing with the snake. And you might not get bit, but that time that you do, it's going to register with you. And it's not just going to be, oh, that was fun, I'll do that again. You don't want to ever pick up a snake again if you get bit, especially by a poisonous one.
And then when you got even with parents, and I've heard different excuses. Well, I don't want them to be, different from everything else that's going on at school. I go, if anything, you should. If anything, they need to stand out. They need to stand firm. If anything, your kids need to see you stand firm on God's will and make His your priority. It goes back to that environment when you have that low lighting, and not only with the low lighting, but then also these dresses that are definitely not modest. And now you add on top of it movement that is encouraging both male and female to come together. Nowadays, at school, and especially proms, now it's not even that. You bring the homosexuality element into it. But you have all these things, it's just promoting sin. That's what it boils down to. There is no way around it. So whenever a young person or anyone comes to me and they say, what do you think about prom? Or any subject, I always go off of what Paul wrote to the church of Philippi in Philippians 4:8. Beginning there, listen to what he says. He says, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. And then I would look at them and go, what about prom? Does that fit in that list? Is it praiseworthy? Is it just? Is it pure? No, the answer is no. And so I don't need that as part of my life. As a Christian, it shouldn't be part of your life.
And I think, too, you mentioned, I don't want my children to be left out and be different. John said to be in 1 John 2:15, he says, love not the world. Now, you can be in the world and not of the world. Just because I'm in Walmart doesn't mean I work for Walmart. I'm in Walmart. I don't work for them, though. I can be in the world and not participating and doing all the things that the world says are okay. And he continued on and said, neither the things that are in the world. I think prom fits in that category with some other sins. He says, if any man love the world, Father's love's not in him. And then it mentions on a deeper level, too, all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, prom, lust of the eyes, something that looks good, such as maybe a man would look upon an attractive woman, the pride of life. And this, I think, would fall into the category of someone who's arrogant enough to say, I can go to prom and it not be a problem for me. I can be involved with sin and it not be a problem for me. Tell that to Judas, who dealt with the money bag and it became a problem for him, and it ended up being one of the reasons he sold Christ was he was a greedy individual. Tell that to people in that nature too. Tell that to Peter, who said, Lord, I'm not going to deny you 3 times. I'll die for you. And then himself with the other apostles forsook him and fled, and then did exactly as Christ said and denied him 3 times. Tell that to any number of individuals. Even Paul. Paul thinks he's doing the right thing. There's no way he could possibly be sinning in his mind. And yet Jesus says, I'm Jesus, the one you're persecuting in Acts 9. And John says on a deeper level, it's not of the Father, it's of the world. And I would tell these mothers, I'm not wanting to stay in the world. I want to die, Lord willing, or be called home on Judgment Day to be with Jesus, not to go and stay in the world. And I know premillennialists would love to stay in the world for an extra 1,000 years That's simply not going to happen. And if we hold on to the things in the world and make them our idols, so to speak, on Judgment Day, there will be nothing more heartbreaking than, number one, knowing that the world's going to be destroyed and everything you've ever held on to is going to die with it. And then number two, because of your love for those things and things of the nature of prom and other things like that, you lose your own soul. And if you were even, the next time, if I'm ever asked by an individual, is prom okay? Is this okay? I ask them this. If you feel the need to ask a preacher, it's probably not okay. And I've heard that said by many gospel preachers. If you feel that you need to ask to get justification from a man of God, so to speak, as a preacher is, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And I just, when it comes to prom, I caution everyone. If you have questions about it, look for Don's message. Look for a tract by Alan Webster called You're Not Going to the Prom. Yeah. Read some of the information that you can find about Galatians 5 and even 1 John 2. These types of texts that are very good. But I want to close with this, and then I'll let you finish out anything you want to say. When Jesus used this graphic illustration of the seriousness of avoiding sin, Alan Webster wrote this: If thy hand or thy foot offend thee, cut them off. Cast them from thee. It is better for thee to enter in to life halt or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. And then he finally goes down to say, we might paraphrase this to say this: it is better to enter into heaven having not gone to the senior prom, than having gone to be cast into hellfire. Our teens are honest enough to admit that dancing would put sexual, lascivious thoughts into their minds. They want no part of what Paul said would keep them from heaven, Galatians 5:19 through 21.